Let's see. Lesson book. Did you remember Pat, right? Pam. I'm sorry. Got the P right. Did you bring your lesson book tonight, or? Yeah. Here we go. It's lesson 2. Oh, wait a minute. No, we're on lesson 1 still. I'm sorry. I'll get it right. I'll have to make some more books. I'm sorry. Sit with Jenna. Your assigned seat is with Jenna. I thought about making material myself, like somebody else we know does. But frankly, what Brother Turner has written is better than anything I could put together as far as a study guide goes. Do you have an extra one? Can you look on, Louise, with somebody? Or okay, just here. You can borrow that one tonight, okay? Then I'll make some more copies for Sunday. And I've got a lesson 2 here for Sunday, so I'll give you that. But this material is just a study of what are the people of God from a completely unique approach. I've never talked about it this way before, but he just starts at the very beginning, and we're going to get, by the end of this study, we're not going to really get into a lot of the issues that have divided us and things like that, but we're just going to learn what are the people of God. What constitutes the people of God? How are they to, how are they to work? How are they to worship? How are they to act as God's people? And that's what the purpose of this whole thing is. It's not to open up, as it were, a can of worms, but just to simply start from the Scriptures at the very beginning and work our way through to the end. And I've never approached the subject this way before, and I read this material preparing for the material I was going to present over in India, and I just thought this was just an excellent little workbook to present sometime if I ever had the opportunity. So now I have the opportunity. So we're going to go through all 13 of these lessons. We talked about on Sunday morning, just as a recap, because some weren't here, but God has always had a chosen people, or in the beginning, persons. Person. And we talked about how that Adam and Eve had Cain, they had Abel. And of course, Abel was righteous, Cain was unrighteous, and then Seth was the one that was chosen. We read about Cain's lineage to a point, and then he drops off the map, so to speak. Now, whether his lineage ended, the lineage of his that is given in the Scriptures, let me say his recorded lineage, if I'm being clear enough about that, whether that ends when the flood occurs, or whether it ends prior to the flood occurring, I don't know. And I don't think anybody can really answer that question. But God does give a few little legs of his lineage down to a point, and then we leave Cain alone. And we go back and we pick up the lineage of Seth. Down through the chosen one who was Enoch, who walked with God and was not, for God took him. And in Hebrews we read that Enoch was translated so that he did not see death because of his righteousness. God chose Enoch. Well, then Enoch bore Methuselah. And there is an old rhyme that I learned as a child: the man who the longest lived died before his father did. Well, because Methuselah's father never died, because God took him. And that's the answer to it. And then, of course, Noah was the son of Methuselah. And, a lot of people say that Methuselah was not a righteous man. I'm not sure that's right, because Noah was a righteous man. And Noah was Methuselah's son. We just don't know anything about Methuselah. He's not said one way or another. So I can't comment on that. I won't go beyond the Scriptures on that one. And then, of course, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And who was the chosen one of Noah's sons? Shem. The lineage of the Savior of the world came through Shem. So God has always had a chosen people. He chose Abraham. He chose Isaac. He chose Jacob. And of course, in many of these cases, we see that the one who was chosen was not the logical one. Not the one the world would have said should be chosen. Because, for example, who should have been chosen by the logic of the world? Who should have been chosen between Jacob and Esau? Esau, because he was the firstborn. But he was not chosen. Before birth, while she was in childbirth, a prophecy was made that the elder would serve the younger, and the younger would become greater than the elder. And so, yeah, Jacob was chosen before he was born by God to be the one through whom the lineage would come that would bless the earth. Now, I doubt they fully understood what that all meant at that time. When God promised Abraham, "In your seed all nations of the earth shall be blessed," did Abraham understand that that meant that the Messiah was going to come from him? I'm not sure he understood what Messiah was, because we're not told. I have a suspicion that he was told a lot more than what we have recorded. But what we have recorded is what we need to know. And that's really where we need to stay, is what God decided we need to know. And of course, then we read that Israel was finally chosen, and as we read in Deuteronomy chapter 7, God told Israel, "I did not choose you because you were mightier than the other nations of the earth. I did not choose you because you were more righteous. I chose you because I loved you, and because I keep the promises that I made to Abraham, your father." And he did keep that promise. He chose Israel before Israel ever became a nation. So, if somebody says, does God choose people not based upon their own life and based upon, predestine them before they're born? Well, yeah, He has done that many times in the Old Testament. So there was predestination there. Now, get on up. And obviously, there was a change that was to be made, because everyone was to know God before they got into the kingdom. That was not to be in the New Age. But I'm just going to make that brief comment and move on. 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10 makes clear that there is a change, and makes clear that there is a chosen nation today. And who are God's chosen people today? Disciples were called blank, first at Antioch. Christians, okay. And then we talked about some of the things with the gods of men, how that going over to India for the last 3 years has kind of opened my eyes to the way a lot of the world sees God. The Hindus, their whole concept of God is different than ours. If you start talking to them about God, it'll be like Moses talking to Pharaoh and saying, God says, let my people go. Well, Pharaoh said, well, I'm a God. Why should I let these people go? Because your God says let them go. He's not any greater than me. I'm a God. And that's the concept that the Hindus have of God. That's the concept the Buddhists have of God. And in reality, when it comes right down to it, they'll never admit it. But the Muslims have that same concept of God, because you better not ever denigrate the great prophet Muhammad. He really is their God, whether they like it or not. They don't worship the same God that Christians do. Even though that lie has been told many, many times. Allah is not the same God. He is one of a pantheon of gods that they used to worship, but then, well, I'm going to get off that. I'm going to waste too much time there. Okay. If I don't get off, I'm going to waste too much time with it. But, Isaiah 44 talks to us about the folly of worshiping a God which we create. I take a tree and I carve this nice little end of a bench out of it, and what do I expect this wooden bench that I cut out of this tree to do for me? I expect it to serve me as a place for me to sit on. I don't bow down to this and worship it because I created it. But those who create their gods, as the Hindus do, they'll build their little gods out of flowers. Little gods, big gods. I mean, they house them on trucks and trailers. And after Dasara, they take these gods that they have made out of flowers and they take them down to a local pond to drown them. And I said, drown your God? The first year I saw this, they told me that's what they were doing. I said, yes, it brings them good luck for their growing in the fields the next year, to throw their God into a pond and drown them. Well, now that's, the Christian brethren call it drowning their gods. I'm sure they have another term for it. I would imagine they would. But that's essentially what they do. And they expect this God that they created to give them good fortune for the coming year. And He's nothing more than a creation, man. Well, the greater should not serve the lesser, but the one made, created, should serve the Creator. And that's just a common sense statement. And so then we talked about, well, what is man's, if there is a God who created the world and made everything that is, like nature obviously teaches us there is, in Romans chapter 1 it talks about that, well then, what should be our response to that? Anybody? We mentioned Ecclesiastes 12 as a hint. Toward the end of the chapter. There you go. Except I take exception to the word duty. The word duty is not in that text. If you read the King James, the word duty is italicized. It should say the whole of man. So what is our whole? Fear God and keep His commandments. And as a matter of fact, the New King James, I think, says it more correctly when it says, this is man's all. What we're here for. Well, how can we know then how to serve God? Okay, that's kind of the end of the point. I was going to approach it a different way, but that's the correct answer. Obviously, if God has something He wants us to do, He's got to tell us about it, right? If a parent wants their child to take out the garbage, well, I think everybody here is a parent or has been a parent. Have you ever wanted your child to do something and just sat there and done this, hoping they would get the message? Kept your mouth shut, thinking, well, they'll get the message sooner or later. They'll get the message. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. If you want your child to take out the garbage, you got to say, take out the garbage. I always loved the sitcom thing where the wife is just angry at her husband, and he goes, dear, what's wrong? Nothing. Dear, I know something's wrong, but you need to tell me what it is. Nothing. And yeah, you know something's wrong, but she's not going to tell you. And yeah, that does actually happen in real life, but it goes both ways too, because there have been times when I've been angry at Ruth and hadn't told her what was wrong. So she doesn't get the picture if I don't talk to her. We have to communicate. God has to communicate with us. Because yes, we can see that this world could not have been created on its own or created without a prime mover, which we'll call God for the moment, a prime mover. We can see that, but anything else about that prime mover we can't really understand unless He reveals Himself to us. And so that's where we are. So how does He do that? Through the Word. Cornelius was told to send for Peter in Acts chapter 11, and he will tell you words by which you shall be saved. Right? Now that isn't what it says when Cornelius was told to send for Peter, but when Cornelius is recounting it for Peter, when he gets there, Cornelius says that's what God said to him in the vision. Send him so that he will tell you words by which you may be saved. That's how God reveals himself. And so we might sum it all up. I don't know if we got into these verses. Someone read Psalm chapter 8, verses 5 through 8. And I apologize, but I left my Bible at home, so I'm using my electronic Bible. Psalm chapter 8, verses 5 through 8. Okay. Okay. And so, I think the word here is actually Elohim, from what I understand, which is a term for God. You have made him a little lower than God. And some translations say a little lower than the angels, some say a little lower than God. So I think though that this has to do with a little lower than a heavenly being, is the idea here. But that's where we are. And he has also put what in our hearts? Eternity. Okay? We have a concept, whether we're atheist or not, we have a concept of eternity. Have you ever seen a politician that didn't want to leave a legacy? You know, we've had atheist politicians, but they want to leave a legacy of something behind them in this world. And it doesn't work because after 2 or 3 generations they're gone, nobody will remember who that guy was. You know, I forget what, somebody went out on the streets and was asking people who the first president was of the United States, young people, and most of them didn't know, didn't have a clue. And they'd say, well, who was George Washington? And wildest guesses in the world. I mean, I couldn't believe the idiots that were out there, but, you know, they didn't know who George Washington was. You know, people forget. And so when we try to leave a legacy on this earth, it doesn't work. But still, man wants to leave something behind when he's gone, even if he thinks he's not in existence anymore. It means something to him to have eternity. So he's got to have something left. So man, even the atheists, have eternity in their hearts in some form or fashion. So there's got to be something more to us than just life on this earth. 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8 says that God is something. Whoever's there first. Come on, whoever's there first. Tom, you got it? 4, 7, and 8. Okay. What does it say in Genesis chapter 1? God made us in His own image. And God is love, it says here. Turn to 1 John chapter 2. Let's read verses 3 through 5. Okay? And so we know that we are in God if we keep His commandments. And what's His prime commandment? Turn to Matthew chapter 22. Let's read verses 36 through 40. Some of you that are not shy, just go ahead and start reading when you get there. (22, 36 through 40). Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's it. That was 40. Okay. Would you say that it's a correct statement to say that our purpose on this earth is to reflect God's nature back to Him? Well, when we reflect it back to man, we're really reflecting it back to God. Jesus said, if you don't love your brother whom you have seen, how can you love God whom you haven't seen? So when we love our neighbor, we're loving God. When we hate our neighbor, he's made in the image of God, so we're hating God. We're kind of like little mirrors, you might say, for God. And when God looks down at us, what vision is He seeing in that little mirror? Is He seeing His true nature, or is He seeing something different? I'm afraid too many of us, He's seeing something different. But if we're to reflect God's image back to Him, we need to have a means of doing that. And of course, we've already talked about it's through the Word. But is there more to it than that? I think so. God's very purpose determines the nature of man. Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10. Okay? And so there is going to come a day when God is going to judge us on whether we really have been a good little mirror or a bad little mirror. I know that's a very trite little... I thought it was cute. Okay? What is our reflection of God? What has it been through our whole life? If it's been a good one, then He'll judge us worthy of eternity with Him, where we can continue to reflect His nature for eternity in heaven. But if we're not, He doesn't want us around. I guess, okay, I'm not going to bring up that. I don't think that fits very well. But does man have a choice in this thing? Well, wait a minute. That compromises the sovereignty of God's will. You can't have free choice. Well, how do you know? Well, it obviously was. Okay. All right? You hadn't really hit at it yet. Okay? Philosophically, I think we can answer this. If man is not a free moral agent, can morality exist? If we're simply little robots programmed by God to do exactly what He wants us to do, and if I go over here and I just slap you, well, God made me do that. And that's what a true Calvinist believes. Every action you take, God made you do that. He predetermined that before you were ever born. Does that mean, can morality exist if we're simply mind-numbed robots? It can't. Morality demands that we be free moral agents. And if we were made in the image of God, and God is a free moral agent who can choose, we said Sunday that being made in the image of God does not mean that God has 2 feet, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 nose, 2 eyes, and so forth. It's what's inside of us. It's spiritually. We're made in the image of God. And so if God is a free moral agent, has the ability to make a choice, we must also be free moral agents if we're made in His image. And the fact is that if we are not free moral agents, morality itself cannot exist because God makes us do everything we do. I knew... Yeah, I'll go ahead and say this. It's crude, but I'll go ahead and say it. One fellow that I met told me that the best place to pick up girls to go commit fornication, he was in the Army, he said, was at church. He said, oh, they get all revved up at church and they get full of the Holy Spirit and they're ready to do anything, including the most immoral acts. And that's the way the Calvinists views it, though. If you leave church and you go commit immorality, well, God made you do that because His sovereignty means everything you do is what He's predetermined you're going to do. And if you're predetermined for heaven, you're predetermined for heaven. If you're not, well, it doesn't matter how many times you go to church. You're not going to make it. And that's what the Calvinists would say. But that can't be right. If morality exists, man has to have the ability to choose it or to reject it. Otherwise, it's not morality. In the Old Testament, God oftentimes chose a person and then taught them. Now, I was thinking about the case of Jacob and Leah and Rachel the other day, and this kind of fits a little bit. But think about this for a minute. God chose Jacob before he was born. Jacob saw this hot-looking girl named Rachel. But her sister Leah, it says, has weak eyes. I think that means that she was disfigured in the face somehow. She wasn't pretty. He didn't love Leah. He loved Rachel. Well, he was tricked into marrying Leah. And I'll tell you what, with the rebellious nature I've got, if I had been Jacob and been tricked into marrying Leah, I would have been one angry dude. I really would. And I would have been angry at her because she was a part of that trickery. When he went into that dark tent, not knowing who was in there, she could have said something. I'm not my sister Rachel. My father has pulled a fast one on you. So you have a choice here, Jacob. What do you want to do? She could have done that, but she didn't. I won't get into why she might have or not have. We're not told. But she didn't do that. And so then he got Rachel, and he loved Rachel. But in the end of things, in Genesis chapter 48, we read in Genesis chapter 35 that Rachel died and was buried where? On the way to, was later to become Bethlehem. Then in chapter 48, Jacob is recounting his history and how he wants to have his bones carried back and be buried in the cave of Machpelah with his father Abraham and his father Isaac. And he's giving instructions to the people, and he says in chapter 48 that Rachel died much to my sorrow, and we buried her beneath the palm trees out here on the way to, I think it was Hamath. At that time it was called. You know where that was? It was less than a day's journey from the cave of Machpelah. Less than 1 day's journey from the family crypt. But do you know who was buried in the family crypt? Leah. Chapter 49 of Genesis, Jacob says, and I buried Leah in the cave. Do you think, now that shows, that tells you something right there. Because even if when Rachel died he was in such a hurry, he could not have carried her to the cave then, he could have come back and gathered her bones up and carried her to that cave later, but he never did. He left her out there in the middle of the desert with a stone erected up over her grave, which Moses said when he wrote Genesis is called the stone of Rachel to this day. She was buried in a nondescript grave out in the middle of the desert, and it was her sister Leah that Jacob had enough regard for that he buried her in the cave of Machpelah. Now, do you think in the beginning that Jacob would have ever thought that God could have changed his heart so that he loved and respected his unloved wife more than the pretty one? I doubt it. But God chose him, and then through all of his faults and his failings in his life, God brought him to become the man that God needed him to be in the end. And he made some great changes in his life because of that. Now, in Jeremiah chapter 31, we read, Jeremiah 31, we'll read verses 31 through 34. If I can get there. I'll read it this time. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. But this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and on their heart I will write it, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they will not teach again each man his neighbor and each man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and their sin I will remember no more. Now God had chosen the children of Israel to be His people before they were ever formed. But God says there's going to come a change. Then you see, let me finish that sentence first. After God chose them, then He had to teach them. But God says there's a time coming when that's not going to be that way anymore. I'm going to teach them, and then I'm going to choose them. Those that are taught. Now in Matthew chapter 16, let's turn over there and read verses 24 through 27. And I'm running out of time, so I need to hurry here. He says, For false Christs and false prophets will arise and show you great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. Behold, I have told you in advance. So if they say to you, Behold, He is in the wilderness. Am I in the right place here? 16. That's not it. Okay. Excuse me. Yeah, I messed up. Then Jesus said to His disciples, If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whosoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And so on. So here we have a change. Before God chose His people and then taught them, now He's going to teach them, and the ones who wish to, Jesus says, are going to come to Him. And those who don't wish to, those who want to stay in the world, are going to be lost. Acts chapter 2, verses 37 through 40, we read the end of Peter's very famous sermon, the first recorded gospel sermon. And the people were cut to their heart. And they said, Men and brethren, what shall we do? How do we get out of this situation we've gotten ourselves into where we stand condemned? And Peter tells them how to do it. But does he tell them, oh, God's going to do it all for you and No, he says you need to repent. You need to change your heart, which will lead to a change in your life. That's what repentance is. And you need to be buried with Christ in the likeness of His death, burial, and resurrection. As Romans 6 describes baptism, you need to be baptized unto remission of sins. And you'll be raised up to walk a new life. And so, those who fear God and work righteousness, as Acts chapter 10 says, in the case of Cornelius, will be accepted by Him. So with free will and fairly treated without respect of person, a man can become one of God's people in the true moral sense of the term. And so it becomes a situation where we have a change made, that now whatever we do, whether we eat or drink or whatever, we do all to the glory of God Almighty. And we reflect His nature back to Him as free moral agents. And so, beginning the rest of these lessons, and I think I'm out of time, God gave each of us a free moral self. On page 3, He's got this highlighted. God gave each of us a free moral self and then asks us to give it back to Him. That's really what the people of God are all about in the Christian age. Is giving God back the self that He has given to us. And so with that, we'll close tonight. We'll enter into lesson 2 for Sunday.